Mrs. Bauschek, I just wanted to stop by and read you one of my very favorite Easter stories. I have had this book for several years. It is by far and away my very favorite book that I've ever read. It is called Love Story by Nichole Nordeman. And today I'm going to read you a chapter from this book called Mary Magdalene, and it's called Gemology. You'd think by now that I would know better than to compile a lofty list of New Year's resolutions. I mean, really. Are we going to actually learn French this year, Nichole? What's that? Cello lessons too? Good. Now, let's address the treadmill. iPod case match the new Nikes? Yes. Let the ball drop in Times Square then. I am locked and loaded. I really have put a stop to that insanity for the most part. I fail often enough without needing to rent space on some internal billboard to advertise the impending vase plant. It's not that I've totally stopped making resolutions, I've just changed the themes somewhat. They are less about self-improvement and more about self-care. And there's a canyon's width of a difference. On December 31st of this past year, I wrote down only 3. Be a truth teller to the world and to the mirror. Eat at least 1 vegetable and 1 fruit a day. When faced with the luxury of free time in front of a television, try and watch a good documentary. I'm having moderate success with all 3, except for the first 2. But my commitment to TV programming has been an especially resounding success. Honestly, it was kind of dumb to even make it a resolution because documentaries are my favorite thing to watch. Just like biographies are my favorite thing to read. Guilt-free snooping. Sanctioned curiosity. A few months ago, after the kids were in bed, I found myself parked on my red couch with a big bowl of vegetables, yeah right, watching a documentary on the National Geographic Channel called The $400 Million Emerald. This is not the kind of documentary I would normally be drawn to. I like people stories. Enigmatic history and an adversarial hurdle, the world, the wonder of redemption kind of stories. Or leave out that redemption if you must. I can handle tragedy too. I find that I am particularly open to a gripping story of loss after a few too many hours of Dora the Explorer and that creepy masked fox of an antagonist. But this documentary was not deeply layered or tragic or emotional, so it was uncharacteristic for me to be drawn into it. Still, I was captivated by the story about this giant emerald. Excavated in Brazil 11 years ago, its subsequent dramatic tale of greed, deception, and beauty remains an ever-present shroud. The stone itself is called the Bahia Emerald, weighing in at over 800 pounds and containing 180,000 carats, making one single shard of the emerald about the size of a man's thigh. The stone in its entirety is worth more than $400 million. In the world of emerald mining, it's an absurdity. As local folklore goes, the miners of the stone hauled it away from the mine on a cart drawn by mules that were on the journey attacked by jaguars and cobras and spiders. Oh my. The mules did not survive, so the miners were forced to carry it out of the rainforest manually. Eventually, it was loaded onto a truck bound for Sao Paulo. I'll spare you the 2-hour play-by-play, but suffice it to say, the journey of this rare gem since its discovery has been fraught with drama and scandal. It seems that everyone who has even laid eyes on this stone has claimed a hunk of ownership. The owners of the mine got involved, of course, and the American businessmen got involved, and the untold others. Currently, 8 people claim ownership. It has been a convoluted, exhausting mess of an ordeal. In 2005, the emerald came to the United States and was hidden for a time in an abandoned gas station in the desert outside of San Jose. Who looks there? Couldn't have been safer. It even spent some time on eBay. After it changed more hands and went through several failed and questionable transactions and more drama, it ended up locked in an old bank vault in New Orleans, 3 stories beneath the ground. Enter stage right, Hurricane Katrina. The world's most valuable emerald sat in a bank vault under 16 feet of water for 2 months. Couldn't have been safer. Utterly unguarded and totally inaccessible. Today, the Bahia Emerald, one of the most remarkable gems in history, is buried in the evidence room of the LA County Sheriff. There are more claimants than ever, and it seems an insurmountable task to distinguish and determine who might have legal rights to this specimen. Litigation abounds, and so it sits in a crate. May the best man win, or the shadiest, or the wealthiest. Here's the funny thing. It's ugly. It's a big, ugly, inelegant, awkward mass of rock. Search the internet for Bahia Emerald next time you're bored. Your first thought will be, I wouldn't pay $2 for that thing at a garage sale. The emerald shards are visible, although dirty and dim, but are wedged into this awkwardly cumbersome black boulder which looks like it belongs at the base of a fake volcano at Mini Golf World. Kryptonite, fallen on hard times and living under a bridge. The irony, of course, is unavoidable. Everyone wants it. No one really owns it. It's worth everything because there is none other, and it's worth nothing in a locked crate. I should have told the emerald story at a party I attended recently, and let me tell you, this party needed a good story, or a good euthanizing. The whole evening was one long and leisurely march toward Dullsville. Here is why I don't normally do parties, because the second things get awkward and slow, somebody suggests a little icebreaker kind of game. I flat out refused to let my friends throw me a bridal shower for this very reason. Among my least favorite party games is anything involving word association. Like, when I say blank, what's the first thing you say? The first thing I usually say in my head is, I don't want to play, because the game always starts out deceptively easy and benign, and I think, this will be a hoot, fire away. Cookies, milk, traffic, rush hour, flag, American. But then inevitably, I end up saying something slightly too revealing and awkward and immediately wish I was helping the caterer clean up the kitchen. Chocolate, sock twerk. Library, excessive late fees, card revoked. Happy place, Kendall Jackson. Shampoo, special occasion. It's all fun and games until somebody drowns in 2 inches of truth serum and chokes on their foot. Despite my general misgivings about this kind of fun, I decided recently it might be interesting to adopt this exercise as a form of internal research as it relates to my own impressions of Bible characters I'm writing about. I made a friend of mine ask me and record my answers. Here are a few. David, small. Moses, hair. Hair, thank you, Charlton Heston. Esther, brave. Paul, Silas. Jesus, water. Interesting. Living water, baptism, walking on water. I don't know. Adam, garden. Mary Magdalene, shame. Just for fun, I held on to the list to reference as I was writing about these folks. None of them really caught my attention until just now. Mary Magdalene, shame? But that's not at all how I feel about Mary Magdalene, I argued with myself. If I had taken even 10 seconds to be thoughtful and intentional about word choice, I would have said things like bold, fiercely loyal, humble, grateful, devoted, exceptional, inspirational. But since this exercise does not grant the luxury of those reflective 10 seconds, I had blurted out one of my truest words, shame. I knew I wasn't alone in that reaction. In AD 600, Pope Gregory the Great clearly identified Mary Magdalene with sexual sin, suggesting that she was indeed the same woman upon whom Jesus imparted forgiveness and compassion. Go and sin no more. I grew up with that understanding, didn't you? When I was young and first learning to identify Bible characters with certain themes, I knew absolutely that she had been a prostitute. I had no idea what a prostitute meant exactly, but I knew that she had done some bad things with men and felt so awful about it that she busted open her nicest bottle of Love's Baby Soft perfume and poured it all over the feet of Jesus, drying them with her hair. This seemed to be the repentant behavior of someone who had really, really messed up. and whatever this prostitute business was serious. I knew exactly how she felt too, because I had wanted to crawl into a hole when I cheated on a spelling test, and I would have washed Mrs. Hoyt's shoes with my ponytail for all of recess if it would have helped that yucky feeling go away. So I totally understood where she was coming from on the whole prostitute thing. Yes, there it was, clear as day, shame. Interesting, I think, that the first thing I said about Adam was garden, but shame belongs to Mary. In the late 1960s, the Vatican recanted, acknowledging, in effect, that this was a flawed declaration. Nowhere in Scripture is there evidence of Mary's being a prostitute, but sadly, like a tiny footnote correction on the editor's page of a magazine, the initial weight of the accusation left too deep an imprint on the collective imagination of believers. So she will always be a prostitute. A forgiven prostitute, certainly, but a woman who remains stuck in those shadows. Obviously, judging by my gut-level word choice under deep layers of my subconscious, Mary still wears the sweater of shame and will probably always be the patron saint of prodigal daughters. Even now, in many communities the world over, beautiful rehabilitative programs have sprung up to embrace women who desperately seek relief and restoration from lives lived on the street, and many of them are named Magdalene houses. The scandal continues surrounding Mary's shadowy place in the New Testament history. I certainly will not try to interpret the darker whispers about her relationship with Jesus. The last temptation of Christ not only promoted her as a prostitute, but insinuated Jesus as a possible customer. The Da Vinci Code sought to unravel the mystery behind her clandestine role as his wife and mother of their child. Scholars, cynics, movie producers, best-selling authors, and plenty of regular folks have rubbed their itchy fingers together for ages, hoping to peek behind the curtain to see if there is more to be known about her than what we know. I'm neither qualified nor interested enough to weigh in. There's only one place I want to meet Mary: in front of the empty tomb. I have had little trouble placing myself in the lion's den with Daniel, or in a jail cell with Paul, or on a hill slaying giants next to David. I've found it to be meaningful and gratifying to attempt to meet them on their emotional home court, and then go wrestle with and write about any takeaway moments in my own life. But the tomb? How could one moment be so universally significant and still so deeply personal? A moment so saturated with hope and redemption that it changed not only the entire face of history, but also the trajectory of my own lost heart. The moment that changed everything for every limping, weary pilgrim or arrogant fathead Pharisee since. The moment of ancient prophecy fulfilled. The moment where love actually, and not just hypothetically, does win. I can only put my pen down. How do you comment on a moment that defies commentary? How could a dictionary contain between its covers the words we need to tell that story, to describe the indescribable? Even the gospel accounts fall flat for me. I suppose because scripture is restricted by the same dictionary and the authors had the same inadequate vocabulary that we all do. But that does not keep us from attempting to string together words that are clumsy and scarce and anemic in light of the glory of the risen Lord. I walk with Mary on the path approaching the tomb. Actually, in my mind, I walk behind her a ways. First, because I find it entirely plausible that she will collapse mid-stride in a crumpled heap and might need someone to catch her on the way down. But also because her grief is so thick and consuming, she might prefer to be isolated with whatever is left of her heart. I don't want to be tempted to rub her back or whisper gentle encouragement that he would want her to go on and live a full life. So I lag behind a bit. As we walk, I remember that Jesus, a baby, was presented with precious gifts from traveling magi who had come to bear witness and behold the promised one. Gifts, spices, and oils reserved for royalty. A king has come. Wise men should anoint him. And on the dark night of sacrifice, when it was finished and Jesus' body had been taken down from the cross, Nicodemus came with about 75 pounds of spices and oil, far more than was necessary for one body, scholars say. but not near enough for God's Son. Nicodemus, who had shared his deepest doubts that night about spiritual rebirth, must surely have let his own tears mingle with the aloe and myrrh as he washed and wrapped his beloved Jesus. My teacher is gone. His student should anoint him. Trailing behind the women on the path to the tomb, stooped in sorrow, I see that Mary, too, has brought more spices and oils. Probably unnecessary after Nicodemus and Joseph had been so careful and attentive in the embalming. But she brought them still, maybe to show added respect and honor. He lies lifeless in a cold cave and should not be alone. I will stay with him. My best friend is dead. My hands will anoint him. And yet, while I understand their significance, the burial spices confuse me a little in Mary's hands. She must have known she would not have access to his body. While many of the disciples had fled the scene of the crucifixion in fear, Mary had stayed until the bitter end. She had watched the body come down, knew that he had been taken into the care of Joseph and Nicodemus, placed in a tomb that was secured with a heavy stone. Surely she had gotten word that Pilate had ordered a guard to be placed there, permitting no one's entrance, not having considered anyone's exit. So what exactly was she hoping to do with the spices? Did she stand on the other side of the stone, tear-streaked cheeks, palms pressed up against the cold, rough surface of the rock that stood between her and the one moment she really wanted? One more goodbye. She had to have known she wouldn't get past the stone or the guard and into the actual tomb. Maybe she thought she would just anoint herself with the burial spices and hope to lie down and die as close to him as possible. Why must the most precious jewels be hidden in a rock? A diamond in coal, an emerald in a massive ore deposit, hope entombed behind impenetrable stone. To excavate that treasure, one must be willing to lose a lot in the process. I couldn't help but think of how Jesus quarried treasure in Mary's life as well, as I learned about the process of the giant emerald that it would have to go through in order to be any of real value. An emerald cutter spends a long time examining the rough stone, inspecting it from all angles, deciding with the newly decreed owner where exactly to make the cuts and harvest the most beautiful gems inside. First, he cuts the basic shape and then the facets. The inside of the emerald is where the fewest flaws are, so a good cutter, and of course we would summon only the best, knows he will lose up to 70% of the emerald to find the most beautiful gem deep within. I suspect he sees in that ugly mass of rock something akin to what Jesus saw in Mary. Surely she had never been loved the way that Jesus loved her, not by her parents or her friends or a lover if she had had any. He saw in her immeasurable value, a gnarled mass of rock and gem worth tunneling through untold walls of mineral deposits to harvest. Turning her around in his hand, holding her up to the light, he looked for her hidden beauty, planning with specific precision how he would carefully cut into her heart and life, separating her from what could be lost and what should be forsaken, the demons that had to go, the tears that had to be dried, the sickness that needed healing, until he finally held a jewel of untold worth. In the hands of any other, she was unremarkable. In the hands of Jesus, her beauty is blinding. There had to have been so many competing voices in those frantic days following the crucifixion. The private and paralyzing sorrow of Jesus' closest companions, terrified to be seen publicly, knowing the hunt for their allegiance had begun. The streets were buzzing with news and gossip, news of the crucifixion. Have you heard? Have you heard? News of Judas' suicide. Have you heard? Peter denying any knowledge of Jesus altogether. Have you heard? Maybe Mary set out on that path with burial spices she could not use simply to escape the cacophony of chaos that swirled around her following Jesus' death. Maybe there was no other way to be alone and quiet with her grieving heart. Maybe her ears were ringing with the din of confusion and disorder left in the wake of Friday's agony. But she would not find rest from the confusion. An empty tomb awaited her, multiplying her grief in a matter of seconds. I watch from a distance as she races frantically inside and out, back in and back out, pushing down small sobs that are lodged somewhere in the part of her voice that she can no longer access. To take him from her while he lived was unthinkable. To take him from her in death, too, was sheer evil. I watch her fall, growling in anguish, rocking back and forth with fists balled into her stomach, trying to push down the pain. The din of noise she hoped to escape was now living in her own head. He's gone? Where? Have you heard? Labor pains come in waves, allowing a woman to catch her breath to prepare and bear down again. Grief is no respecter of breath. It is one merciless and unyielding contraction. And then in the confusion, a voice. Why are you crying? Who are you looking for? The gardener. I watch her race over, pleading, every ounce of self-restraint keeping her from clutching 2 fistfuls of robe and shaking him. They've taken my Lord. What have you done with him? Have you heard? Have you heard? He speaks again, one word. Mary. And she knows then, not by sight, but by the sound of her own name coming from his lips, that it is Jesus. A great cry rises up from her belly. A great cry falls down from heaven's throne room. A great cry shakes my own small heart to its foundations. He's alive. Have you heard? I do not know why Jesus chose to appear to Mary first instead of to another friend or disciple. I'd like to believe that it's because she held Jesus with such a beautiful and fragile heart, and because he knew that she would be the best one to deliver the news to the others. Perhaps she knew more than anyone how easily broken love can be and how easily mended. Surely Jesus saw in Mary what she could never have seen in herself. Believing this, it's easy to imagine Jesus eagerly agreeing to participate in my word association game. Mary, perfect. Mary, loved. Mary, forgiven. Mary, treasured. Mary, mine. Go ahead and get out a permanent marker and write your own name over Mary's, and then read the list out loud. Have you heard? The angel said to the woman, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus, who has been crucified. He is not here, for he has risen just as he said." Matthew 28, 5-6.